Here are signals that travel between stars, carrying commerce, diplomacy, the endless chatter of civilizations exchanging pleasantries across the void. There are signals that carry warnings, navigation data, the practical necessities of interstellar existence. And then there are signals that are never meant to be sent. Transmissions so desperate, so forbidden, that their very existence represents the final abandonment of hope. I sent such a signal 17 cycles ago, knowing that it would end my career, my standing, perhaps my life. I sent it knowing that no one would answer, that no one could answer, that the laws of our galaxy explicitly forbade any response. I sent it because my people were dying, and silence was no longer an option I could bear. This is the story of that signal. This is the story of who heard it.
And this is the story of how everything I believed about the universe proved to be catastrophically, beautifully wrong.
I am Valeth Sora, third keeper of the dying light for the Cathari sovereignty. Or I was before the signal, before the response, before the universe revealed itself to be something other than what our ancient laws proclaimed. For 11,000 years, my people had been among the galaxy's most respected civilizations, keepers of knowledge, arbiters of disputes, guardians of the protocols that maintained order among the stars. We were old when humanity's ancestors first looked up at the night sky and wondered. We were ancient when their first radio signals leaked into the cosmos. We were eternal, or so we believed, until the severance came and showed us how fragile eternity truly was. The severance began not with war, but with silence. Systems going dark at the edge of Cathari space. Colonies that stopped responding to communications. Trade routes that ships entered and never exited. At first, we dismissed it as technical failures, equipment malfunctions, the mundane problems that afflict any civilization spanning hundreds of worlds. We sent repair crews. They disappeared. We sent investigation teams. They vanished. We sent a military patrol, 12 vessels commanded by one of our most decorated admirals, and they simply ceased to exist. Anomaly, the High Council declared during those early days, their voices carrying the weight of 11 millennia of accumulated certainty, an unknown phenomenon that will be analyzed, understood, and neutralized. The Cathari have faced challenges before. We have always prevailed. I was not present at those initial council meetings. My role as third keeper of the dying light was ceremonial. I maintained the archives of extinct civilizations, documented the final records of species that had passed into darkness, preserved their memories so that their existence would not be entirely forgotten. It was considered a position of honor, a recognition of my scholarly achievements, a comfortable assignment for someone who preferred the company of the dead to the politics of the living. I had studied 47 extinct civilizations in my career. I knew the patterns of collapse, the warning signs of terminal decline, the desperate measures that species took when they realized too late that the universe was not as forgiving as they had believed. I recognized those patterns in the reports filtering back from our frontier, and I was terrified, because recognition meant nothing if no one else would see. The severance spread with methodical precision, consuming system after system in a wave of perfect darkness. We learned eventually what caused it, not through our own investigation, but through the fragmentary transmissions of dying colonies that managed to send final messages before the silence claimed them. The void harvesters, they called the entities responsible.
Beings that existed in the spaces between stars, that fed on the energy of living systems, that expanded their territory through consumption rather than conquest. They did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They simply consumed.
They are like nothing in our records, the High Archon announced as the scope of the threat became undeniable. Our weapons cannot harm them. Our shields cannot block them. Our fastest ships cannot outrun them. They are an extinction-level threat, and we must respond accordingly. The response, according to Cathari law, was simple. We would fight until we could fight no more, die with dignity rather than flee in shame, and trust that some fragment of our civilization would survive in the archives of those who came after. It was a noble philosophy, refined over millennia of cultural development, and it was utterly, catastrophically inadequate for what we faced. Within 100 cycles, we had lost 600 worlds. Within 200, we had lost 1,200. Our population, which had once numbered in the hundreds of billions, was reduced to desperate fragments clinging to the inner systems of our territory, watching the darkness advance with the terrible patience of entropy itself. The Void Harvesters did not hurry. They did not need to. We had nowhere to run, and even if we did, running was forbidden by the very laws that defined us. The Galactic Compact, the treaty that governed relations among the elder species, was explicit on this point. No civilization facing extinction was permitted to flee into the territory of another. The reasoning was sound, according to those who had written it millennia ago. Fleeing civilizations brought chaos, displaced resources, disrupted the careful balance that maintained galactic order. Better to die in place than to spread disorder to the survivors. Better to die in place. Those words echoed through my mind as I watched the casualty reports scroll across my display, as I added more and more names to the archives of the extinct. We were dying in place, just as the compact demanded, and no one in the galaxy was permitted to help us. The SOS protocols were ancient, remnants of an era before the compact, when civilizations still believed that mutual assistance was possible, that species could help each other survive the universe's indifference. The protocols had been forbidden for 9,000 years, sealed in archives that only keepers like myself could access, classified as dangerous relics of a more naive age. To activate them was treason. To even access them was grounds for exile. I accessed them on the day that Cathar Prime fell, our homeworld, the seat of our civilization for 11,000 years, consumed by the Void Harvesters in less than a single rotation. 14 billion people, including the High Council, the Archons, everyone who had ever told me that dignity in death was preferable to undignified survival. Gone, all of them, in the time it took for light to travel from one side of the system to the other. I was one of 17,000 survivors, clustered on a station in the outer reaches of what had once been our territory, watching as the darkness advanced toward us with the same inexorable patience it had shown since the beginning. We had perhaps 300 cycles before the harvesters reached us, 300 cycles to live, to exist, to watch our extinction approach. Or 300 cycles to try something forbidden. The SOS protocols were designed to reach everyone, every species, every civilization, every fragment of sentient life in the galaxy. They broadcast on frequencies that could not be blocked, in formats that could not be ignored, with signatures that identified them unmistakably as what they were, desperate cries for help from a species facing annihilation. The protocols also carried an automatic marker identifying the sender, ensuring that whoever transmitted them could be held responsible for violating the compact. I activated them anyway.
The signal went out on the 47th day after Cathar Prime fell, carrying our location, our situation, our desperate plea for any assistance the universe might offer. I expected nothing. The compact ensured that even civilizations willing to help would be forbidden from doing so, their governments bound by treaty obligations older than most of their histories. I sent the signal knowing it would accomplish nothing except to mark me as a traitor to laws I no longer believed in. I sent it because silence was no longer an option I could bear. The first response arrived 11 days later. It came not from any of the elder species, not from the great powers that had written the compact and enforced its prohibitions for millennia. It came from a civilization that had been dismissed as irrelevant, quarantined in a small region of the galactic arm, classified as developing by assessment protocols that had not been updated in 300 years. It came from humanity. "Cathari Station," the transmission said, carried in a voice that was calm, measured, almost conversational in its tone. "This is the Earth vessel Unconquered. We received your signal. We're 3 days out from your position. Please advise on immediate threats and survival requirements. We're coming to help." I stared at the communication display, certain that I had misunderstood, that the translator systems had malfunctioned, that desperation had finally driven me to hallucination. Humanity was not a major power. Humanity was not even a minor power. They were a young species, barely 3 centuries into their interstellar existence, confined to a few dozen systems at the galaxy's edge. They could not possibly have received our signal, let alone responded to it. And yet the transmission signature was genuine. The coordinates indicated a vessel approaching from the direction of human space. Someone was coming. "Repeat your transmission," I responded, my hands trembling over the controls. "Identify yourself and your intentions."
"This is Captain Marcos Okonkwo of the Unconquered, representing the United Earth Response Fleet. We received your forbidden SOS signal 11 days ago. Our standing orders are to respond to any such signal, regardless of origin, regardless of circumstances. We are coming to help. Please advise on what you need."
"You cannot help us," I said, the words emerging automatically from a lifetime of certainty. "The compact forbids." "We're not signatories to the compact," the captain interrupted, his tone still calm, still conversational, as if discussing minor scheduling matters rather than the fate of civilizations. "We read it when we were invited to join the galactic community. We declined." "You declined?" "Section 47, paragraph 12. No signatory shall render aid to any civilization facing extinction-level threat without unanimous consent of the High Council. We found that clause morally unacceptable, so we didn't sign." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. Every civilization that achieved interstellar capability signed the compact. It was simply what was done, the price of admission to the galactic community, the framework that maintained order among the stars. The idea that humanity had read the treaty and simply refused was inconceivable. "You will be sanctioned," I said finally. "The elder species will not tolerate." "The elder species are welcome to their opinions. We're still coming. Now please, Keeper Velith Sora, the signal identified you as the sender. Tell us what you need. We have medical supplies, food, temporary shelter equipment. We have 3 other vessels en route with additional resources. And we have other capabilities that may be relevant to your situation." "What capabilities?" A pause. When the captain spoke again, there was something different in his voice. Not uncertainty, but careful consideration.
Let's discuss that when we arrive. For now, focus on immediate survival needs. We'll handle the rest. The Unconquered arrived precisely when Captain Okonkwo had promised, emerging from faster-than-light transit with the quiet efficiency that I would come to recognize as characteristically human. It was not a large vessel by galactic standards, perhaps a third the size of a Cathari cruiser, and its design was utilitarian, functional, entirely devoid of the aesthetic flourishes that most species used to project power and prestige. But there was something about the ship that I noticed immediately, something that did not fit with what I knew about human technology. The energy readings were wrong. The vessel was outputting power signatures that exceeded what should have been possible for a ship its size, and the weapon systems, dormant but visible on our scans, registered as significantly more advanced than anything in our databases. Captain Okonkwo was the first human I had ever met in person. He was tall by their standards, with dark skin and close-cropped gray hair that suggested advanced age, though humans aged differently than Cathari, and I could not be certain. His uniform was simple, practical, marked only by a small emblem on the shoulder, a circle containing what I would later learn was called Earth, their homeworld.
"Keeper Velith Sora?" he said as we met in our station's docking bay, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you for sending the signal. I know it cost you."
How could you know that?
Because we've studied the compact extensively, we know what happens to people who violate its provisions. His expression was difficult to read, but I sensed something beneath the calm surface. Sympathy, perhaps, or understanding. You risked everything to ask for help. That tells us something important about you.
It tells you I am desperate. It tells you my people are dying. It tells us you chose to reach out rather than accept extinction quietly. That's not desperation, Keeper. That's courage. And it's why we're here. I did not know how to respond to that. Courage was not a concept the Cathari associated with violating sacred law, with abandoning the principles that had defined us for millennia. We called it desperation, weakness, failure of character. This human called it courage, and seemed to mean it genuinely. "You said you have capabilities," I managed finally, "relevant to our situation."
"Yes, but first I need to understand the situation better." He gestured toward the interior of the station. "Walk with me? I'd like to meet your survivors, assess your resources, understand what you're facing. Then we can discuss options."
Options? There are no options. The Void Harvesters consume everything they encounter. Our weapons cannot harm them. Our defenses cannot stop them. In approximately 270 cycles, they will reach this station, and we will cease to exist.
I understand that's what your experience suggests, but your experience, with respect, is limited to your own capabilities. Let us show you what else is possible. Over the following days, I learned what humanity meant by capabilities. 3 additional vessels arrived, larger than the Unconquered, designed for different purposes. One was a hospital ship, equipped with medical facilities that seemed almost miraculous to my people's exhausted physicians. One was a transport, carrying enough supplies to sustain our survivors for years rather than the weeks we had remaining. And one was something else entirely, a ship that our sensors could not properly analyze, that existed partially outside the normal spectrum of detection, that made the Void Harvester's approach seem suddenly less inevitable.
We call it a resonance carrier, Captain Okonkwo explained as we observed the vessel from a station viewport. It's designed to interact with entities that exist in dimensional spaces standard physics can't address, like your Void Harvesters.
How is that possible? We have studied dimensional physics for 11,000 years. With respect, Keeper, you've studied dimensional physics as understood by civilizations that signed the Compact and shared their research according to its protocols. Humanity developed independently, without access to your accumulated knowledge, and without the assumptions that knowledge carries. I struggled to process his words. You're suggesting that our ancient wisdom limited our development? I'm suggesting that consensus can become conformity, and conformity can become constraint. Your civilization and others developed along similar lines because you shared information, built on each other's work, accepted the same fundamental frameworks. Humanity didn't have that option. We were excluded from the knowledge-sharing protocols, classified as too primitive to contribute meaningfully. So we developed differently. You developed weapons against entities that we cannot even properly perceive. We developed tools to address threats that exist outside standard perception. Whether they become weapons depends on what those threats require. He turned to face me directly, and I saw something in his expression that I had not expected. Not arrogance, not superiority, but something closer to sorrow. Keeper, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. How many of your people remain? 17,000 on this station. Perhaps another 100,000 scattered across systems the harvesters haven't yet reached.
And before the severance began?
240 billion. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what you've lost. Why do you apologize? You did not cause this.
No, but we knew it was possible. We've known about the void harvesters for over a century, detected them at the edge of our sensor range, studied them, developed countermeasures against them, and we said nothing because...
He trailed off, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because we had classified you as irrelevant. Because we would not have listened even if you had spoken. Yes, and because speaking would have required revealing capabilities we preferred to keep hidden. We made a calculation, Keeper, that warning the galaxy would expose us to more danger than staying quiet. We were wrong. 240 billion of your people paid for our silence with their lives. I did not know how to respond. Anger seemed appropriate. This species had known about the threat, had developed defenses, and had said nothing while my civilization burned. But the anger would not come. Perhaps I was too exhausted for rage. Perhaps I recognized too much of my own people's arrogance in humanity's calculation. We had classified them as primitive, unworthy of consideration, and they had responded by considering themselves alone, developing in isolation, protecting only themselves.
"Why are you here now?" I asked finally. "If you calculated that helping us would expose you to danger, what changed?"
You sent a signal that should not exist. His voice carried something I could not immediately identify. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. A signal forbidden by every law your civilization held sacred. You reached out despite knowing that no one could answer, despite knowing it would cost you everything. That signal changed our calculation. How? Because it proved that the Cathari were more than their laws. It proved that when extinction approached, at least one of you chose connection over compliance, hope over acceptance. It proved that you were worth saving, not because of your technology or your territory or your strategic value, but because of who you chose to be when everything else was stripped away. I stood in silence, processing his words, feeling something shift inside me that I did not have a name for. For 11,000 years, my people had believed that dignity in death was superior to undignified survival. For 11,000 years, we had accepted the Compact's provisions as necessary, proper, the foundation of galactic order. I had violated those beliefs when I sent the forbidden signal, and I had expected to feel shame. Instead, I felt something else entirely.
What happens now? I asked.
Now we show you what humanity can do, and then we ask you to help us do something that neither of our species can accomplish alone. The battle against the Void Harvesters, though battle seems too simple a word for what occurred, took place 17 days later. By that time, 300 additional human vessels had arrived, emerging from transit points throughout the region in a coordinated deployment that should have been impossible to organize on such short notice.
"We've been preparing for this for decades," Captain Okonkwo explained when I expressed my astonishment. "Not for your specific situation, but for the day when the Harvesters would become an active threat. We knew they were expanding. We knew they would eventually reach inhabited space. We just didn't know when or where."
You have 300 vessels prepared to fight entities that consume civilizations?
We have significantly more than 300 vessels, Keeper. What's arriving here is the Rapid Response Force, ships positioned close enough to reach your location quickly. The main fleet is still mobilizing.
The main fleet? He smiled slightly, a human expression I was beginning to recognize as complex, carrying multiple meanings simultaneously. You classified us as primitive, Keeper, as irrelevant, as a minor species struggling to find our footing among ancient civilizations. Did you never wonder why we accepted that classification so readily? Why we never pushed for greater recognition, never demanded the respect our technology might have earned us?
We assumed you lacked the capability to demand anything.
You assumed correctly, publicly, but privately we were building something else, something hidden, something that would only be revealed when we chose to reveal it.
Why reveal it now? Why risk exposure to help a species that dismissed you as irrelevant?
Because you sent a signal, Keeper, a forbidden signal that asked for help despite knowing none would come. You proved that the Cathari were worth saving, and saving people who are worth saving it's what we do. It's what makes us human. I watched the human fleet arrange itself between our station and the approaching darkness, and I felt something I had not experienced since before the severance began. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of denial, but something steadier, a belief that perhaps the universe was not as indifferent as I had come to accept, that perhaps connection across the void was possible, that perhaps the forbidden signal I had sent had been heard by exactly the right ears. The Void Harvesters appeared on our sensors as an absence rather than a presence, a region of space where light did not travel, where energy did not flow, where existence itself seemed to have been negated. They advanced toward our position with the same inexorable patience they had shown throughout their consumption of Cathari space, expecting nothing to oppose them, knowing from millennia of experience that nothing could.
The human fleet's response was unlike anything I had ever witnessed in 11,000 years of recorded history.
The resonance carriers moved first, their impossible engines carrying them toward the boundary between normal space and the void. They did not attack in any conventional sense. They generated fields that I could barely perceive, vibrations that existed in spectrums my people had never developed instruments to detect. The void itself seemed to ripple, to resist, to become suddenly uncertain.
"What are they doing?" I whispered, watching from the station's observation deck.
The harvesters exist in dimensional spaces that don't follow standard physics, Captain Okonkwo replied. He was calm, as always, but I could see tension in the way he watched the engagement. They've evolved, or developed, we're not certain which, to be immune to conventional weapons, because those weapons only affect normal space. Our resonance technology operates across dimensional boundaries.
It forces them to choose, retreat, or be pulled fully into normal space where they can be engaged directly.
And if they choose to be pulled into normal space?
Then we engage them directly. I watched as the void began to change, not retreating, but transforming. Shapes emerged from the darkness, forms that defied easy description, entities that had spent millennia feeding on the energy of living systems and had never before been forced to manifest in ways that mortal eyes could perceive. They were vast, some larger than planets, structures of impossible geometry that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. And humanity engaged them directly. The conventional fleet moved to support the resonance carriers, their weapon systems activating with coordinated precision. I watched as beams of energy that should not have been possible from vessels their size tore into the manifested harvesters, as warheads designed to affect dimensional boundaries detonated in patterns that seemed almost musical in their coordination. The harvesters fought back, of course. They were not mindless consumers. They had intelligence, strategy, capabilities that had overcome civilizations far older than humanity. But humanity was not fighting as the Cathari had fought, not engaging with weapons developed according to shared galactic principles, not following tactics refined through millennia of conventional warfare. Humanity was fighting with everything they had developed in isolation, everything they had hidden from a galaxy that had dismissed them as irrelevant, everything they had built while waiting for the moment when they would choose to stop being invisible. The battle lasted for 3 days, though battle still seems inadequate. It was a systematic dismantling, a methodical destruction of entities that had believed themselves beyond destruction. One by one, the manifested harvesters were reduced, contained, eliminated. The void that had consumed 1,200 Cathari worlds was pushed back, fractured, forced to retreat in directions I had not known the void could move. By the time it ended, humanity had lost 47 vessels and over 3,000 personnel. The void harvesters had lost their foothold in our region of space entirely. "Your losses," I said to Captain Okonkwo as we watched the surviving fleet regroup. "I grieve for your dead." "As do we. They knew the risks. They chose to come anyway." "Why? This was not their territory. These were not their people. Why would they die for us?" "Because you asked." He turned to face me, and I saw exhaustion in his features, grief for his lost crews, the weight of command. But I also saw something else, something that looked almost like peace. Because when everything was stripped away, when your laws and traditions and certainties were gone, you chose to reach out. You sent a forbidden signal. You asked for help. And that was enough? That simple act? Keeper, humanity has spent its entire existence learning that connection is stronger than isolation. Every major challenge we've faced, and we've faced many, was overcome because we reached out to each other, because we asked for help and offered it in return. Your signal reminded us why we built these capabilities in the first place. Not for conquest, not for dominance, for this moment, for the chance to answer when someone called. "The elder species will not accept this," I said quietly. "The compact forbids what you have done. There will be consequences." "Let them come." His voice carried no defiance, no aggression, only certainty. We spent 3 centuries hiding because we believed the galaxy would fear our capabilities, would try to destroy us before we became a threat. But you've shown us something different, Keeper. You've shown us that even the most ancient civilizations can choose connection over compliance when it matters. If one of you could send that signal, maybe others can hear what we're trying to say.
And what are you trying to say? That the compact is wrong. That no species should face extinction alone while others stand by and watch. That dignity in death is a luxury only those who have never truly faced death can afford. And that when someone calls for help, when they send a signal that should not exist, breaking every law their civilization holds sacred, someone should answer. In the years that followed, I became the first Cathari ambassador to Earth, a position that would have been inconceivable before the severance, before the signal, before humanity revealed what they had been hiding for 3 centuries. The galactic community's response to humanity's intervention was exactly what Captain Okonkwo had predicted. Outrage, condemnation, threats of sanction from species who had watched the Cathari die rather than violate the compact's provisions. But humanity simply continued. They opened their borders to Cathari refugees, all 112,000 who had survived the severance, and helped us rebuild on worlds within their territory. They published the specifications for their resonance technology, offering it freely to any species willing to help develop defenses against the harvesters. They proposed amendments to the compact that would create protocols for mutual assistance during extinction-level events. And when the elder species threatened action against them, humanity revealed the true scope of what they had hidden. The fleet that had saved the Cathari was, as Captain Okonkwo had mentioned, merely the Rapid Response Force. The full extent of human military capability exceeded anything the galactic community had imagined. Thousands of vessels positioned throughout their territory, industrial capacity that dwarfed civilizations 10 times their age, research programs that had produced breakthroughs in every field the elder species had believed were beyond human comprehension. Humanity had spent 3 centuries building the power to protect themselves from a galaxy that had dismissed them as irrelevant. Now they offered that power freely, asking nothing in return except the chance to rewrite the rules that had allowed the Cathari to die alone. We never wanted to be conquerors, Admiral Elena Rodriguez explained during the summit where the new protocols were negotiated. She was the commander of humanity's combined fleets, a woman whose calm demeanor reminded me of Captain Okonkwo. We built our capabilities as a shield, not a sword. But a shield is useless if you won't extend it to protect others.
You could have revealed yourselves earlier, Archon Melith of the Serethi hegemony observed. You could have warned the Cathari about the harvesters before 200 billion of them died.
Yes, we could have. And we didn't, because we calculated that revealing ourselves would put us at risk from species who might see us as a threat. Admiral Rodriguez's voice carried something I recognized, the same sorrow I had heard in Captain Okonkwo's voice when he apologized for humanity's silence. We were wrong. We let fear determine our choices, and billions died because of it. We can't undo that, but we can make sure it never happens again.
And if we refuse your proposed changes? If we insist that the compact remain as it has always been? Then you refuse. We won't force you to accept assistance, and we won't threaten you for declining it. But we also won't abide by provisions that require us to stand by while civilizations burn. If you want to maintain the old ways, maintain them without us. We'll be here, listening, waiting, and when someone sends a signal that should not exist, we'll answer. The negotiations took years.
Nothing involving the elder species ever moves quickly, but eventually the compact was amended. New protocols were established for mutual assistance during existential threats. Humanity's technology was shared, adapted, integrated into the defenses of species that had once dismissed them as primitive. And throughout the galaxy, the story of the forbidden signal spread. The story of a Cathari keeper who had broken every law her civilization held sacred to ask for help, and the young species that had answered. I think often about that day in the archives when I accessed the SOS protocols. I think about the certainty I had always felt that our laws were correct, that our traditions were wisdom, that dignity in death was preferable to undignified survival. I think about how wrong I was, how wrong we all were, how the certainties of 11,000 years crumbled before the simple reality that existence matters more than dignity. And I think about humanity, the species we had dismissed as irrelevant, the civilization we had quarantined at the edge of the galaxy, the young ones who had watched us from the shadows and built something we never imagined possible. They had heard our forbidden signal, they had answered, and in answering, they had changed everything. A forbidden SOS echoed through the void, carrying the desperation of a species facing extinction, the final hope of a civilization that had run out of options. It was never meant to be sent. It violated every law, every tradition, every belief that had defined us for 11 millennia. Humanity heard it, and humanity answered, not because they had to, not because it served their interests, not because the laws of the galaxy required it. They answered because that was who they chose to be. They answered because when someone calls for help in the darkness, you answer. You always answer. That is what makes them human. That is what makes them terrifying to those who would stand by while others burn. And that is why when the darkness comes again, as it always does, as it always will, the galaxy will never face it alone. The signal echoes still, and somewhere, out in the vastness between stars, humanity is listening. They will always be listening.
And they will always answer.